The old lodge had stood for 60 years before a fierce gale tore it apart in one night. Clara and Walter Brooks surveyed the ruins of their hillside retreat. Shattered timbers, scattered keepsakes, and the daunting prospect of rebuilding at 80. Their once steady hands, which had crafted this haven from scratch, now shook at the monumental challenge ahead. 3 miles away, 12-year-old Noah watched from his family's deck as the storm ravaged the valley. While neighbors murmured about the loss, Noah quietly gathered his father's tools. Could a child's hands restore what decades of hillside life had forged? Could wisdom flow backward from youth to age? Morning light filtered through jagged rafters, casting broken shadows across what was left of the Brooks parlor. Clara knelt amid the wreckage, her arthritic fingers gently prying a leather-bound scrapbook from under a collapsed shelf. Remarkably, it had survived, though water had smudged the edges of several photos. "Walter," she called, her voice faint against the crisp valley air. Walter navigated the unsteady floorboards, his makeshift cane carved from a fallen branch, groaning under his weight. His lined face softened briefly as he settled beside his wife of 58 years. "Look at us," Clara murmured, pointing to a faded image of them as newlyweds, standing proudly before the lodge's first frame. "So young." Walter's rough thumb traced their youthful outlines. "We built it once," he said, almost to himself. "But those were different days, different strength." They turned the pages slowly, each photo a milestone of their shared life. Their children chasing each other on the deck, now reduced to splinters. Winter gatherings around the brick hearth, now a heap of rubble. The last family gathering 5 years ago, before their son relocated to New Zealand and their daughter's tech job in Seattle left no time for visits to the hills. "They've been calling," Clara said, as if sensing his thoughts. "James wants us to stay with him in Tucson." Walter's jaw clenched at the thought of a retirement village, surrounded by unfamiliar faces playing bocce. And Emma offered an apartment in Portland, near her. An apartment, Walter echoed, the word alien, conjuring images of neighbors stacked like crates. Clara hugged the scrapbook to her chest. "What choice do we have, Walter? We can't stay here, and we can't rebuild." "Not now." Walter stood with effort, staring through the gaping wall at the hills beyond. These ridges had anchored him for 6 decades. The idea of flat cityscapes and fluorescent lights made something in him shrink. "The Millers said we could stay with them until we sort things out," Clara added, gathering a few salvageable items into a crate. "Their guest room is small, but it'll do for now." Walter nodded silently, his gaze falling on the oak chest that had somehow endured. Inside were the fragments of their life: birth records, their marriage certificate, military papers, the deed to land, now cradling only ruins. "We should call James back," Clara said, her practicality surfacing as she wrapped an unbroken saucer in a cloth. "He mentioned a waiting list for that community with a good clinic nearby." Walter's silence spoke volumes. Clara sighed, feeling the weight of losing not just a home, but their autonomy, their essence, their purpose. "We've had a good life here," she said softly. The afternoon wore on as they salvaged what they could, a meager haul against a lifetime's worth. Clara paused occasionally, struck by memories tied to each recovered item. The dented tray from their 40th anniversary, the hand-whittled holiday decorations, the quilt her grandmother made, now too stained to save. As dusk approached, Walter insisted on one last walk around the property. Clara watched from the splintered deck as Walter's hunched form traced the boundary they'd once fiercely guarded against nature's gradual advance. Now, nature had swept it all away in a single, unyielding surge. When he returned, his eyes were bloodshot but tearless. "The Millers will be here at 9 tomorrow," Clara reminded him. "We should pack what we can." Walter nodded, casting a final glance at the setting sun, its golden glow spilling over the wreckage. "I never thought we'd leave this place except in coffins," he murmured. Clara slipped her hand into his, her wedding band catching the fading light against their entwined fingers. "I know," she whispered. "I know." That night, They fashioned a makeshift bed in the one corner still shielded by partial walls and a patch of roof. Tomorrow would bring the humbling shift to being guests, then dependents. But tonight, they would sleep one last time in their hills, under their stars, even if the roof that once protected them now opened to the vast, uncaring sky. 3 miles down the valley, 12-year-old Liam Carter sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, carefully arranging tools in a handcrafted oak box. Each tool had its place, chisels lined up by size, hammers nestled side by side, screwdrivers sorted by type and purpose. Some were standard, bought from the local supply store, but others bore the marks of personalization, handles wrapped in rawhide, metal polished to a soft sheen from years of use. "Liam, dinner's ready," his mother called from downstairs. "Coming," he answered, setting a hand planer into its foam-lined slot. The Carter cabin was humble but solid, built by Liam's father, Daniel, and expanded twice as their family grew. Unlike most kids in the valley who attended the regional school 30 miles away, Liam was homeschooled, partly due to the perilous winter roads, partly because his parents valued hands-on learning. At the dinner table, talk turned to the storm's aftermath. Pastor Thompson says the relief fund raised nearly $2,000. Hannah, Liam's mother, said, passing a dish of stew. Not enough to rebuild, but it might help the Brooks with temporary housing. Daniel nodded, tearing a piece of cornbread. "I stopped by their place today. It's worse than I expected. Foundation split in 3 spots. Are they really moving to Tucson?" Liam's 16-year-old sister, Sophie, asked. "That's the word," Daniel confirmed. Their son's been pushing them to move closer for years. Now they've got no real choice. Liam ate quietly, soaking in every word. While most in the community saw him as just another kid, those who knew him noticed something unique in his quiet focus. He spoke sparingly, but when he did, his words carried the weight of deep thought. "Mr. Brooks taught me how to spot edible berries last autumn," Liam said at last. Said his grandfather taught him when he was my age. Hannah exchanged a look with Daniel. "It's heartbreaking, sweetheart. They've been part of these hills longer than most of us have been alive." After dinner, Liam retreated to his room and slid a sketchbook from under his mattress. Inside were meticulous drawings, not the spaceships or comic heroes typical of boys his age, but architectural plans, cross-sections of structures, and joinery techniques he'd learned from shadowing his father. Daniel Carter was renowned across the county for his woodworking, and Liam had been his apprentice since he could toddle. The latest pages held something new: measurements, angles, and material lists for a cabin. Not just any cabin, but one designed for elderly residents, with wider doorways, minimal steps, and reinforced supports. A soft knock broke his focus. "Still up?" Daniel asked, peering in. Liam quickly closed the sketchbook, but not before his father glimpsed the detailed plans. "That's some fine work," Daniel said, settling on the edge of Liam's bed. "Mind if I see?" Hesitantly, Liam handed over the sketchbook. His father's eyebrows lifted as he flipped through the pages, noting the precision of the lines, the meticulous annotations, and the clever adaptations. "You've been paying closer attention than I thought," Daniel said, a newfound respect in his tone. Liam shrugged. "I listened." Daniel tapped a page. "Low shelves, reinforced bathroom walls for handrails. You're thinking of the Brooks, aren't you?" Liam nodded. "Wouldn't need to be fancy, just sturdy, safe." Daniel studied his son's face. At 12, Liam still had a boy's softness, but his eyes carried a quiet wisdom beyond his years. Daniel had seen it when Liam nursed an injured falcon back to health last spring, and again when he modified a neighbor's plow after the man lost 2 fingers in a mishap. "It's a good idea, son," Daniel said gently. "But rebuilding takes money, materials, manpower. The Brooks don't have insurance for this kind of loss." "I know," Liam said, taking back the sketchbook. "I was just thinking." After his father left, Liam reopened the book and worked on his designs past midnight. In the corner of his room, a tin can labeled building fund held his savings, $183.27 from odd jobs, birthday cash, and selling hand-carved birdhouses he crafted in winter. It was far from enough, and he knew it. But in the gap between numbers and impossibility lived the tenacity of hill folk, And in that space, Liam Carter was forming a plan. Dawn broke sharp and clear as Clara and Walter prepared to leave. The Millers' pickup would arrive soon, ending 60 years in their hillside haven. "Did you pack your pills?" Clara asked, ticking through her mental list. Walter nodded absently, kneeling before a small steel trunk he'd pulled from the debris. The latch was stiff with rust. When it gave way, he hesitated, as if opening a portal to the past. Inside were his military keepsakes, discharge papers, medals, and worn cases of folded flag, and atop it all, his veteran's cap. The faded Navy cap with silver stitching had joined him at every Veterans Day ceremony, Independence Day picnic, and comrade's funeral since 1953. Walter lifted it gently, brushing dust from the emblem. Worn lettering read, "Vietnam War Veteran, 1st Cavalry Division." "Thought this was gone," he murmured, turning it in his hands. Clara paused her packing. "Wear it today. Might remind the Millers there's still pride in these old bones." Walter set it on his head, its familiar weight a small comfort amid the ruin. In a cracked window's reflection, he barely knew himself. The proud soldier now, an old man, uprooted by forces beyond him. "Feels like running," he said softly. Clara rested a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't defeat, Walter. It's a tactical retreat." Her stab at military lingo drew a faint smile. The hours passed with hard choices. What few belongings could come? What would stay for later salvage? Each item carried memories. A rocking chair built for their firstborn's arrival, Clara's grandmother's porcelain, miraculously intact in its cabinet, books too waterlogged to save, Walter's workshop tools too heavy to move. By noon, their life was reduced to 3 duffels and 5 crates. "We're here," Tom Miller's voice called from outside, followed by the thud of a truck door. As Clara greeted their neighbors-turned-rescuers, Walter took a final walk through the wreckage of their bedroom. He stopped at the dresser, where Clara's music box sat unscathed, its tiny ballerina frozen in mid-twirl. He slipped it into his pocket for later, a small surprise. "Ready, Walter?" Tom called, already hoisting crates. "1 minute," Walter replied, his voice breaking. He stood in the ruined doorway, memorizing the view he'd woken to for most of his life. The rolling pasture stretched toward a cedar grove, the far ridge etched against a clear sky. The drive to the Millers was mostly quiet. Walter stared out the passenger window as their hillside faded behind them. His cap rested in his lap, fingers idly tracing the stitching. "You two settle in," Ellen Miller said warmly upon their arrival, guiding them to a small but cozy guest room. "Fresh towels are in the bathroom, and dinner's at 6 o'clock." Left alone, Clara began unpacking while Walter sank heavily onto the bed's edge. "It's temporary," Clara said, hanging dresses in the closet. "Just until we decide about James's offer." Walter nodded, but they both knew the words rang hollow. At 80, starting anew wasn't just hard, it was nearly unthinkable. That evening, after an awkward dinner of polite small talk and sympathetic looks, Walter stepped onto the Miller's back deck. The stars looked unfamiliar from this vantage, the hillside a dark silhouette against the night. He thought of his cap, left atop the dresser in their temporary room, and all it stood for: youthful vigor, purpose, triumph over hardship. Inside, the phone rang, and Clara's voice carried through the screen door. "Yes, James, we're settled for now." "No, I don't think so. I know there's a waiting list." "Yes, your father's okay. Just adjusting." Walter tuned it out, focusing instead on the distant outline of their ridge. Miles away, under moonlight that silvered the ruins, a small figure moved carefully through the wreckage of the Brooks Lodge. Liam's flashlight beam swept methodically over shattered beams and collapsed walls. He carried a measuring tape, notebook, and his father's level, pausing to scribble measurements or check the stability of what remained. Near the front doorway, something caught his eye, a patch of navy among the debris. Kneeling, he pulled out Walter's veteran cap, left behind in the rush of departure. Liam brushed it clean, studying the faded insignia with quiet respect. He tucked it into his backpack, a concrete link to the man whose home he now surveyed with a resolve beyond his years. 3 days into their stay at the Millers, Clara had carved out a routine to anchor their displacement. Mornings were spent helping Ellen with chores, tasks that made Clara feel useful rather than a burden. Afternoons found her on the deck, calling insurance adjusters who offered Slim hope, and James, whose patience was thinning with his parents' hesitation about Tucson. Walter, meanwhile, grew quieter. He spent hours in Tom's workshop, not crafting, just running his hands over tools like those he'd lost. Sometimes he vanished for long walks, returning with muddy boots and a faraway look that unsettled Clara. "He went up there again, didn't he?" Clara asked when Tom returned one evening after looking for Walter. Tom nodded, removing his cap. "Found him standing in what's left of your kitchen, just staring." "He's grieving," Ellen said softly, handing Clara a mug of tea. "Men process it differently." That night, Clara woke to an empty bed. She found Walter at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers, brochures for retirement homes, assisted living flyers, listings for tiny apartments in Portland. "We have options," he said, eyes fixed on the papers. "None of them good." Clara sat beside him, taking his hand. "We have each other. That's something." 3 miles away, Liam spread carefully drawn blueprints across the Carter family's dining table. His father, Daniel, examined them with a craftsman's eye, occasionally asking about load-bearing calculations or material estimates. "You've thought this through," Daniel said at last, looking at his son with fresh admiration. "But, Liam, this would take professional builders serious money. At least $20,000 in materials alone." "We could use salvage timber from the old Harris barn," Liam countered, "and creek stones for the foundation reinforcement." He flipped to detailed material lists and cost projections. "I've calculated it all," he insisted. "If we get help from the church group and use the relief fund for specialty materials." Hannah Carter watched from the doorway, pride and worry mixing in her expression. "Sweetheart, it's a noble idea, but the Brooks are already planning to leave." "They don't want to go," Liam said with quiet conviction. "Mr. Brooks especially. He belongs on that ridge." Daniel exchanged a glance with his wife. "How do you know that?" "I just do," Liam replied, then hesitated before pulling Walter's veteran cap from his backpack and setting it atop the blueprints. "This belongs to him. I found it in the debris." Daniel lifted the cap, studying the Vietnam War insignia. "Your grandfather served in that war," he said softly. "I know," Liam nodded. "That's how I recognized it." A quiet moment hung in the room. 3 generations linked by the faded Navy cap. "Even if, and it's a big if, we could get materials donated," Daniel began, "and even if we could rally volunteers, we'd need the Brooks' permission. Frankly, I'm not sure they'd accept charity." "It's not charity," Liam said firmly. "It's community." The next morning, Daniel made calls to the pastor, to a lumber supplier he'd worked with, to friends with building expertise. By afternoon, what seemed far-fetched began to take tentative shape. Not a certainty, but a possibility. "We should talk to them," Hannah suggested, "before this goes further." The Carters arrived at the Millers just as Walter returned from another lone walk. Introductions were made on the front porch, with Liam hanging back, suddenly shy in Walter's weathered presence. "We wanted to run an idea by you," Daniel began cautiously over coffee and Ellen's peach cobbler. He outlined a community effort to rebuild using donated materials and volunteer labor. Walter's face remained unreadable, but Clara's eyes lit with cautious hope. "We can't accept charity," Walter said stiffly. "With respect, sir," Daniel replied. "When my father lost his hand in a logging accident 15 years ago, you were the first to organize neighbors to help with our harvest. This is no different." A tense silence followed, broken when Liam stepped forward and placed his architectural drawings on the coffee table. These weren't the rough sketches from his notebook, but polished plans, precise and elegantly practical. "I designed it for you," he said, finding his voice. "The bedrooms are on one level, no stairs. Wider doorways. Extra insulation to keep heating costs low." Walter stared at the boy, then the drawings. His hands, aged but steady, hovered over the blueprints as if they were something holy. "You drew these?" he asked. Liam nodded, then pulled the veteran's cap from his pocket. "This is yours, too. I found it when measuring the old foundation." Walter took the cap, turning it in his hands, his jaw tightening with emotion. When did you do this measuring? Clara asked. After you left, Liam admitted. I hope that was okay. Walter stood abruptly and moved to the window, cap gripped tightly, his back stiff. Clara exchanged worried looks with the others. Walter, she ventured. It wouldn't be the same, he said at last, voice rough. Nothing could be. No, sir, Liam agreed. It'd be better, built to last another 60 years. For 3 days after the meeting at the Millers, Walter stayed non-committal about Liam's proposal. He asked practical questions about permits and plumbing, but revealed little of his true feelings. Clara, meanwhile, began to hope, calling James to delay any decisions about Tucson. On the 4th morning, Walter announced he was going fishing. Clara knew it was his way of seeking clarity. Walter always said his best thoughts came with a line in the water. He borrowed Tom's pickup and drove off before dawn. But instead of his usual fishing spot, Walter found himself on the bumpy track to their ruined lodge. Rounding the final curve, he was startled to see a small figure amid the debris, methodically sorting rubble into piles. Liam looked up at the sound of the truck, surprise giving way to resolve on his young face. He straightened, shovel in hand, as Walter approached. What are you doing here, kid? Walter asked, sharper than he meant. Clearing the site, Liam replied simply, resuming his work. Salvaging what's reusable. Walter watched as the boys sorted usable timber from broken scraps, stacking intact bricks in one pile, salvageable fixtures in another. Despite his slight frame, Liam worked with surprising efficiency. Your parents know you're here? Liam nodded. Mom packed me lunch. Walter stood awkwardly, feeling out of place in the face of such clear purpose. Finally, he grabbed a pair of work gloves from a nearby toolbox. Those foundation stones are too heavy for you, he said gruffly. I'll handle them. They worked side by side through the morning, saying little. Walter was struck by Liam's systematic approach. This was no childish whim, but a deliberate reclamation. Around noon, Liam unwrapped sandwiches his mother had packed, offering half to Walter. They sat on a fallen beam, gazing out over the hillside vista. Why are you doing this? Walter asked. You hardly know us. Liam pondered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. My grandpa used to say we're all just borrowing these hills from each other, he said at last. When someone needs help, you give it. That's how we all get by up here. Walter studied the boy's profile, seeing something timeless, a hill-born wisdom passed down through generations. I'm 80 years old, Walter said. Even if we rebuild, Clara and I might not have many years left here. Then those years should be good ones, Liam replied simply. After lunch, Walter helped Liam clear a section for the new foundation. The boy explained his plan, how the new lodge would catch morning sunlight for warmth, how the roof's pitch would shed snow, how the deck would frame the same view, but with wider, safer steps. As the afternoon stretched on, trucks began arriving. Daniel Carter with 2 men from church, then Tom Miller, then Pastor Thompson. They brought tools, salvaged lumber from other projects, and offers of help. No one made a fuss. They just showed up and asked where to begin. Walter found himself directing the effort, pointing out where old support beams had stood, explaining the quirks of the hillside terrain. For the first time since the storm, purpose steadied his stance. By day's end, the site was cleared, and the new foundation's outline was marked with stakes and string. One corner overlapped the original foundation. Liam's idea, tying past to future. This doesn't lock you in, Daniel told Walter as they packed up tools. Just clearing the path if you choose to move forward. Walter nodded, eyeing the freshly staked ground. In the dimming light, he could almost see the shadow of their old lodge, overlaid with Liam's vision of the new. As the others left, Liam lingered, carefully setting a large, flat stone at the corner where the old foundation met the new outline. What's that? Walter asked. First foundation stone, Liam explained. In the old days, they put a coin under it for luck. Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out a Vietnam War commemorative coin he'd carried for decades. With a ceremonial gesture that surprised even himself, he knelt and placed it beneath the stone as Liam held it steady. There, Walter said, his voice thick with emotion. Now it's official. Liam's smile was fleeting but bright in the fading dusk. Together, they stood gazing at the lone stone, a humble start, but a start all the same. When Walter returned to the miller's that evening, Clara took one look at his face and knew the decision had been made. Not with grand speeches, but with a foundation stone and the quiet act of working beside a boy who saw not what was gone, but what could rise. Word spread swiftly through the hillside community. What began as Liam's improbable dream grew into a shared mission when Daniel Carter pinned a simple sign-up sheet to the bulletin board outside the general store. Brooks Lodge rebuild. Volunteers needed. By week's end, the sheet was crowded with names, prompting Ellen Miller to create a proper schedule on her laptop. The printout now hung in the miller's kitchen, a grid of times and tasks lending order to the bold endeavor. "I never imagined this," Clara admitted, scanning the names, some familiar neighbors, others vague acquaintances, a few strangers from distant valleys. "Hill folk look after their own," Ellen said, adding another name to Saturday's framing crew. "Always have." On the first official Saturday, Walter arrived at the site at dawn to find Daniel already there, his truck loaded with lumber, not the salvage scraps they planned, but fresh-cut cedar. "Peterson's mill donated it," Daniel explained. "Old man Peterson said he owed you for pulling his nephew from Clearwater Creek during that flood in '97. Walter shook his head, incredulous. "That was 28 years ago. Hill memory runs deep," Daniel said with a grin. By mid-morning, the site hummed with activity. Men Walter had known for decades worked alongside teens he barely knew. Women arrived with coolers of food and drinks. Pastor Thompson set up a canopy for shade, under which Clara organized the growing operation with quiet efficiency. Liam moved through it all with calm authority, consulting his plans, answering questions, and demonstrating techniques learned from watching his father. Though the youngest on site, his vision shaped every choice. Walter found himself paired with Ed Larson, a retired contractor who'd settled in the hills 5 years prior. Together, they marked foundation lines, debating insulation options. "Smart design," Larson said, studying Liam's blueprints. "Wouldn't change a thing." By lunch, the foundation trenches were dug, forms set for concrete. The scene felt like an old-time barn raising. Focused work laced with laughter, stories, and the occasional friendly dispute over methods. Clara oversaw the food table, directing volunteers with the precision that once managed a household of 5. Watching her, Walter glimpsed the young woman who'd faced hill life with fierce resolve, before arthritis slowed her hands and weariness became her shadow. "Your grandson's quite the architect," Ed Larson said to Walter, nodding toward Liam. Walter opened his mouth to clarify, then paused. The bond defied simple labels. "Yes," he said instead. As afternoon shadows stretched, concrete was poured into the foundation forms. A milestone marked with cold beers for the adults, root beer for the teens, and a solemn cup of coffee handed to Liam by Walter himself. "To solid beginnings," Walter said, raising his cup. Liam's rare, genuine smile lit his serious face. "Yes, sir." Daniel approached as the crew began packing up. "We got teams lined up every weekend," he told Walter, "and some evenings during the week. At this pace, we could have the frame up in 2 weeks. I want to do more than just oversee," Walter said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "These hands still work, even if they're slower." Daniel studied the older man thoughtfully. "Actually, there's something. Several of these young folks have never built anything substantial. They're eager but green. They could use some guidance on traditional joinery, especially for those support beams." Walter straightened, recognizing the offer for what it was, not charity, but respect for his knowledge. "I could set up some demonstrations," he suggested. "Show them how we built things before everything came prefabricated." "That would be invaluable," Daniel agreed. As the volunteers departed, Walter lingered, watching Liam make final measurements before sunset. The boy moved with the focused precision of someone much older, checking his work twice, making careful notations in a worn notebook. "You did this," Walter said when they were alone. "You started something impossible." Liam looked up, squinting against the low sun. "Not impossible," he corrected. "Just difficult. There's a difference." "Yes, sir. Impossible means you don't try. Difficult means you try harder." Walter chuckled, a rusty sound he barely recognized as his own. Where did you get so wise? Liam shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. My dad says I was born with an old soul. Looking at the day's progress, concrete setting in forms, lumber stacked and ready, tools arranged for the next day's work, Walter felt something he hadn't experienced since the storm: anticipation. Not just for the finished lodge, but for tomorrow's labor, for the learning and teaching, for the simple satisfaction of building. As they walked to Daniel's waiting truck, Walter noticed the sign-up sheet Liam carried. Names and times, skills and commitments, a community condensed onto a single page. May I? Walter asked, holding out his hand. The sheet was creased and smudged from being consulted throughout the day. Some names Walter had known all his life. Others were strangers, but together they formed something profound, a promise made manifest, neighbor to neighbor, across generations. The Miller's kitchen had become command central for the lodge rebuilding effort. While men hauled lumber and poured concrete, women gathered around Ellen's worn maple table to coordinate meals, childcare, and the 100 other necessities that kept the project moving forward. At the center of this domestic operation sat Clara, a faded recipe book open before her. Its leather binding was cracked with age, its pages stained and dog-eared from decades of use. Some recipes bore her mother's handwriting, others her own, creating a culinary genealogy that spanned generations. We'll need to feed 20 on Saturday, Ellen calculated, consulting the volunteer schedule, plus whoever shows up unannounced. Clara nodded, flipping through a recipe book. My grandmother's beef stew can be stretched to feed an army, she said, and it gets better sitting on the back of the stove all day. Hannah Carter leaned forward to examine the recipe. Is that the one Walter raves about with the secret ingredient? A smile ghosted across Clara's face. Brewed coffee, she confided. Just a quarter cup deepens the flavor. Soon other women were sharing their own recipes, dishes that had sustained Hill families through harsh winters and joyful gatherings alike. Clara found herself the unexpected authority. Her decades of feeding logging crews and harvest workers suddenly valuable again. Write that one down, urged Mia Fletcher, the youngest of the group at 23. No one makes biscuits like that anymore. Clara hesitated, then carefully tore the recipe from her book and handed it to Mia. Family recipes should stay alive, she said, not just sitting in books. The simple gesture opened a floodgate. Soon, recipes were being exchanged across generations. Clara's traditional methods meeting modern shortcuts, her careful measurements balanced against the younger women's improvisational cooking. On Saturday, Clara arrived at the building site early, supervising the setup of 3 folding tables beneath the shade canopy. The women worked together seamlessly, arranging coolers of drinks, setting out sandwich fixings for lunch, positioning Clara's beef stew in heavy Dutch ovens over portable burners for the afternoon meal. From her spot at the serving table, Clara could see the construction taking shape. The foundation was set, floor joists laid, and subfloor installed. Today, wall framing would begin, the lodge rising vertically at last. Her gaze found Walter among the workers, surrounded by younger men as he demonstrated the proper angle for a dovetail joint. His hands, idle for weeks, moved with familiar precision. The younger builders watched with genuine interest, their attentive postures showing respect. He's in his element, Ellen remarked, joining Clara at the table. I haven't seen him this alive in years, Clara agreed. As morning stretched toward noon, Clara noticed Liam moving between work groups, checking measurements against his blueprints, offering quiet suggestions. Despite the adults around him, the boy carried a gentle authority rooted in expertise, not age. When lunch arrived, workers approached the food tables in waves, loading plates with sandwiches and Clara's homemade coleslaw. Liam was among the last, waiting until others were served. There you are, Clara said, piling a plate for him. You need to keep your strength up. Liam took the food with a shy smile. Thank you, Mrs. Brooks. Clara, she corrected. Anyone rebuilding my home gets to use my first name. As the boy ate, Clara studied him with grandmotherly warmth. You're too thin, she decided, and too serious for 12. Liam ducked his head, uneasy with the attention. "Can you cook?" Clara asked suddenly. "No, ma'am," he admitted. "Mom says I'm useless with anything except campfire beans." Clara nodded firmly. "Then that's what I'll teach you. Every man should know how to feed himself properly." She tapped her recipe book. "We'll start with something simple. Biscuits, maybe." Surprise flashed across Liam's face, then cautious interest. "I'd like that." The afternoon echoed with the steady rhythm of hammers as wall frames rose. Clara served her famous stew to grateful workers, accepting their compliments with the ease of a woman who'd fed others her whole life. Near day's end, she found Liam alone, studying a newly raised wall frame with intense focus. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just checking the angle for winter winds," he explained. "Your old lodge took storms mostly from the northwest." Clara was struck by his foresight, his attunement to the hill's moods. "You see things others miss," she observed. Liam shrugged. "My dad says I was born with eyes that see what could be, not just what is." Clara thought of her recipe book, knowledge passed from mother to daughter across generations. "Wednesday," she said suddenly. "Come by the Millers after school. First cooking lesson." As workers packed up tools and secured the site against evening gusts, Clara watched Walter walk the perimeter of what would become their new home. His step was lighter, his posture straighter. The project was mending something in him that medicine couldn't touch. Later that night, as Clara added the day's food expenses to their thinning savings ledger, she felt Walter's hands on her shoulders. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For feeding them. For making this feel less like charity and more like community." Clara covered his hand with hers. "That boy," she said softly. "He's something special." Walter nodded. "He sees the lodge that isn't there yet. Just like you saw a home on this ridge 60 years ago when all I could see was wildland." The lodge's skeletal frame now stood against the hilltop sky, its wooden bones outlining rooms that existed only in blueprints and imagination. 3 weeks into construction, the volunteer crew had found a rhythm. Weekends brought a dozen or more workers to the site, while weekday evenings saw smaller, specialized teams. Walter arrived early one Tuesday evening, carrying a canvas bag that clanked with metal tools. He found Liam alone at the site, double-checking the alignment of wall studs with a level and plumb line. "Evening," Walter called, setting down his bag. "Thought I might find you here." Liam glanced up, offering a quick smile. "Just making sure everything's square before the roof trusses arrive tomorrow." Walter nodded, admiring the boy's thoroughness. "I brought something," he said, opening his bag to reveal a collection of tarnished hinges, brass knobs, and iron latches salvaged from the old lodge. Liam examined the hardware with curiosity. The hinges were hand-forged, bearing the marks of a blacksmith's hammer from a century past. "These are original to the lodge?" he asked. "Some," Walter confirmed. "Others I swapped in over the years, replacing worn ones. Good metal. They don't make them like this anymore." Liam turned a hinge over in his hands. "We could clean them up, reuse them." "That's what I was thinking," Walter agreed. "Might not match your modern design, though." "They should be used," Liam said firmly. "It's your home. They belong here." Something in the boy's tone made Walter look at him more closely. Despite his youth, Liam had an innate sense of what objects meant beyond their function, how they carried history and memory. As evening deepened, more volunteers arrived. Ed Larson brought a load of reclaimed wood for interior trim. Pastor Thompson delivered donated windows from a church renovation. Daniel Carter arrived with the lumber supplier to discuss the upcoming delivery of roof trusses. "We got a decision to make," Daniel said, unrolling Liam's plans across a makeshift table. Standard trusses would be quickest and cheapest, but they'd limit ceiling height. Custom ones would give us that vaulted ceiling in the main room, but at about $2,000 to the cost. Walter frowned. The budget's already tight. The old lodge had standard 8-foot ceilings, Ed Larson noted. Worked fine for 60 years. But the new design calls for vaulted ceilings, Liam said quietly. For better air circulation in summer and more efficient heating in winter. Walter sensed the boy's disappointment. This detail was key to his vision. "What if we hand-framed the rafters?" Daniel suggested. "Old school style, like they did originally. More labor-intensive, but no extra material costs." I haven't hand-cut rafters in 30 years, Walter mused. I've never done it, Daniel admitted. I know the theory, Liam offered. I studied it in my grandfather's carpentry books. The men exchanged looks. Theory was one thing, execution another. The roof was too critical to risk. I could show you, Walter said suddenly. We used to frame roofs that way before prefab trusses were standard. Takes time, but gives more character and strength if done right. The decision was made. Walter would lead a team to hand-frame the roof, with Liam as his apprentice. Later that evening, as volunteers left, Walter and Liam sat on stacked lumber, cleaning the salvage hardware. Liam had brought a container of vinegar and salt, and they worked side by side, scrubbing decades of tarnish from the metal. My grandfather had hinges like these, Liam said, polishing a brass piece to a soft glow. From the old country. Where was he from? Walter asked. Sweden. He built ships before coming to America. Walter nodded, unsurprised. The boy's meticulous approach, his respect for materials. These were the marks of a craftsman's lineage. Did you always want to build things? Walter asked. Liam considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. I like making something useful, he said at last. Something that lasts. As the last hinge was cleaned and set to dry, Walter gathered the pieces into a wooden box he'd built for their safekeeping. We'll use every one, he promised. Old joining new. Liam looked pleased. That's how it should be. Walking back to their respective vehicles, Walter noticed Liam pause to study the framed doorway that would eventually become the lodge's entrance. Problem? Walter asked. Just thinking, Liam replied. These hinges are heavier than modern ones. We'll need to reinforce the door jamb differently. Walter laughed softly. You don't miss much, do you? My dad says I overthink everything. Not overthinking, Walter corrected. Just thorough. There's a difference. As Walter drove back to the miller's, the box of hinges secure on the seat beside him, he reflected on the unexpected shift in his life. A month ago, he'd been resigned to leaving the hills, his decades of skills and knowledge made irrelevant by age and disaster. Now, each evening brought fresh purpose, teaching techniques to younger builders, seeing his experience valued, watching old craftsmanship blend with modern methods. The lodge rising from the ruins would be different from the one he'd built with Clara all those years ago. Better, perhaps, not despite the fusion of past and present, but because of it. Principal Bennett's office had the sterile efficiency typical of school administrators, with motivational posters providing the only color against beige walls and achievement certificates framed with rigid precision. The woman herself matched the space, her navy suit and tightly pinned hair projecting an order that tolerated no deviation. Mrs. Carter, she began, placing a folder on her desk. Thank you for coming in today. Hannah Carter nodded, hands folded in her lap. Your message sounded urgent. It is. Principal Bennett opened the folder, revealing a stack of absence notes in Hannah's neat handwriting. Liam has missed 11 school days in the past month. Combined with late arrivals and early dismissals, he's nearing the truancy threshold. Hannah straightened. All those absences were excused. I wrote the notes myself. Yes, the principal acknowledged, for family projects and community service. Mrs. Carter, while I admire the values you're instilling, education must come first. Liam's education isn't suffering, Hannah countered. His grades are still excellent. For now, Principal Bennett conceded. But habits formed now impact future opportunities. College admissions boards scrutinize attendance records. Hannah fought to keep her composure. As a homeschool parent until last year, she'd always believed learning happened beyond classroom walls. Enrolling Liam in public school had been a tough choice, made mainly for his social growth. The Lodge project is educational, she insisted. Liam's applying math, physics, architectural principles. Mrs. Carter, the principal cut in, I don't dispute the value of practical experience, but we have standardized curricula and attendance requirements for a reason. The meeting ended with a warning. Further unexcused absences would prompt formal intervention. Hannah left, clutching the folder of absence notes like evidence in a trial, feeling both defensive and uncertain. That evening, as Daniel and Sophie ate dinner, Hannah recounted the meeting. Liam's place at the table sat empty. He was at the building site with Walter, working on roof joists. Maybe she has a point, Daniel admitted reluctantly. Liam's been at that site every spare moment, even weekends. You were the one who encouraged him, Hannah reminded her husband. I didn't expect it to consume him, Daniel countered, or affect his schooling. The discussion continued until headlights swept across the front windows, signaling Liam's return. He entered quietly, clothes dusty, expression weary but content. There he is, Daniel said, gesturing to the plate they'd kept warm. The master builder. Liam smiled faintly, washing his hands before joining them. How's the roof coming? Sophie asked. Good. Mr. Brooks showed me how to cut birds' mouth joints for the rafters. They'll hold for 100 years, he says. Daniel and Hannah exchanged glances. Son, Daniel began carefully, we got a call from your principal today. Coffee stains bloomed like rugged terrain across the blueprint's edges. We need to prioritize, Walter announced to the gathered volunteers. Roof and exterior walls first. Ed Larson frowned at the plans. That's still 2, maybe 3 weekends. Weather report says snow by next Thursday. A murmur of concern passed through the group. Hill snow didn't arrive gently. It came with force, making construction hazardous, if not impossible. We could do it in 1, Liam said quietly. All eyes turned to the boy. If we get more help, he continued, pointing to key sections on the blueprint. Focus teams on critical areas, work longer hours. Daniel shook his head. Most folks here have jobs, families. Church has its harvest festival next weekend, Pastor Thompson added. Many regulars will be there. Walter watched Liam's face, disappointment warring with resolve, the weight of responsibility etching his young brow. The boy had poured everything into this project, planning each step with a precision men twice his age might admire. Now, nature itself seemed to thwart his careful design. What if we adjust the approach? Walter suggested, tracing a weathered finger across the blueprint. Get the structure closed in, even if it's rough. Something to keep out snow while we finish the interior through winter. Liam considered this, mentally recalibrating. We need to rework the sequence, prioritize weatherproofing over finishing work. The group leaned in as Liam marked the blueprint with new notations, simplified roofing methods, temporary fixes, contingency plans. The elegant design he'd envisioned was bending to practical necessity, yet he adapted with striking flexibility. By mid-afternoon, the revised plan was underway. Volunteers were reassigned to critical tasks, supply runs reorganized to prioritize weatherproofing materials. The once pristine blueprint was now a tapestry of hasty revisions, coffee stains, and fingerprints from workers checking measurements. As daylight faded early under an approaching storm front, Walter found Liam alone on what would become the front deck, the battered blueprint spread across his knees, flashlight illuminating new calculations. You should head home, Walter said. It's getting cold. Liam nodded, eyes still on the paper. Just finishing these adjustments for tomorrow's crew. Walter eased himself onto the rough planks beside him, joints creaking. Plans change, he said after a pause. Nature makes sure of that. I know, Liam replied, voice tight with frustration. But I promised we'd have you home before first snow. Home's relative, Walter said thoughtfully. Right now, it's the Miller's spare bedroom. Before that, it was a lodge that took 30 years to feel like home. When Claire and I got married, we lived in a tent on this spot for 2 months while I built the first room. Liam looked up surprised. A tent. Canvas walls and a dirt floor, Walter confirmed. Clara hung curtains inside that tent, if you can believe it. Said it made it feel permanent. The boy's expression softened slightly. You weren't worried about snow then? Oh, we were terrified, Walter chuckled. First flurry nearly sent us running to her parents' place, but we stayed. Finished that first room just before the heavy snow hit. A comfortable silence settled as the wind whispered through half-finished walls. The blueprint wasn't perfect then either, Walter continued, tapping the paper on Liam's knee. Had to adjust as I went, material shortages, my own miscalculations, Clara's suggestions. The last word carried fond humor. Liam studied the weathered blueprint, its smudges and revisions now less like flaws and more like a chronicle of adaptation. It's still a good design, Walter assured him, just evolving. A snowflake drifted down, then another, settling on the blueprint. Instead of brushing them away, Liam watched as they melted into the paper, adding another mark to its storied history. "We should get this inside before it's ruined," he said, carefully folding the damp blueprint. "Too late for that," Walter observed with a wry smile. "But that doesn't make it less valuable." As they walked to their vehicles, the snowfall thickened. Not yet the heavy blanket that would soon cloak the hills, but a signal of what was coming. Walter glanced back at the partially built lodge, its skeleton stark against the darkening sky. "It'll stand," Liam said, following his gaze. "Maybe not exactly as planned, but it'll stand." Walter nodded, hearing in the boy's words a wisdom that transcended lumber and blueprints, an acceptance that life's strongest structures are often those shaped by adaptation, not rigid plans. The lodge's roof was nearly done, its dark green metal panels glinting in the thin November sunlight. Despite the early snow, the volunteer crew had enclosed the structure, creating a weather-tight shell that would allow interior work through winter. Windows were set, doors hung on their salvaged hinges, and a propane heater, sourced by Walter from a retiring neighbor, kept the space workable on frigid days. Clara stood at the Miller's kitchen window, watching Walter climb into Tom's truck for the day's work at the site. Something in his movements caught her eye, a stiffness beyond his usual morning aches, a brief grimace as he hauled himself into the passenger seat. "He's pushing too hard," she murmured. Ellen joined her at the window. "Men his age should be playing dominoes at the feed store, not framing houses." "Try telling him that," Clara sighed. The two women spent the morning preparing meals for the weekend volunteers, but Clara's thoughts stayed with Walter. At 60, they talked about slowing down. At 70, they'd made small concessions to age, a handrail here, a step stool there. At 80, they found a rhythm of careful independence. Now, Walter moved as if he'd turned back time, tackling tasks that men 20 years younger approached cautiously. Shortly after noon, the kitchen phone rang. Ellen answered, her face tightening with concern. "It's Tom," she said, covering the receiver. "Walter's having chest pains." The next hours blurred with urgency. The Hill community had no hospital, only a small clinic staffed 3 days a week by a physician's assistant. Tom had driven Walter straight there, with a PA, gave nitroglycerin, and arranged transport to the regional hospital 60 miles away. By evening, Clara sat beside Walter's hospital bed, watching monitors trace his heartbeat in steady green pulses. "Just a warning," the doctor had said after tests ruled out a major heart attack, but a warning to take seriously. Walter fidgeted with his hospital bracelet, irritated by the confinement. "Unnecessary fuss," he grumbled. "Probably just indigestion." "Indigestion doesn't show stress patterns on an EKG," Clara countered, her voice sharper than intended, fear lurking beneath. "They're releasing me tomorrow," Walter said. "I'll be back at the site by afternoon." "You most certainly will not," Clara said firmly. "Doctor said 2 weeks of rest." 2 weeks. Walter's face fell. "The interior framing's scheduled. Liam's counting on my help with the stone facing for the fireplace." "Liam would rather have you alive than a perfect fireplace," Clara said softly, taking his hand. Walter stared at the ceiling, silent. They both knew the truth beneath his frustration, not just concern for the project, but fear of being sidelined, of losing purpose. When Clara returned to the Millers the next day to pack an overnight bag, she found Liam on the front porch steps, Walter's old wooden toolbox beside him. "Mom told me about Mr. Brooks," Liam said, standing quickly. "Is he?" Clara nodded, moved by the genuine worry on the boy's face. "Just a warning," the doctor said. "But he needs rest. The crew wanted me to bring him this," Liam explained, gesturing to the toolbox. "For when he's feeling better." Clara recognized the box. Walter had built it decades ago, each compartment tailored for specific tools, the lid inlaid with contrasting woods forming their initials. She thought it lost in the storm. "We found it under debris last week," Liam continued. "I restored it, replaced the hinges, refinished the wood. Clara ran her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the care in the restoration. "He'll be touched," she said, "but he's under strict orders not to use tools for a while." "It's not for using," Liam clarified. "It's for planning." He opened the lid, revealing not Walter's usual carpentry tools but drafting implements, pencils, a small-scale ruler, templates, a compass. "I thought he could work on designs," Liam explained. "The interior details, built-ins for the bedroom, the reading nook you mentioned wanting." Clara blinked back tears. This 12-year-old boy understood what Walter needed more than any doctor. Not just rest, but purpose. The following weekend, Walter sat propped in his hospital bed, the restored toolbox open across his lap. On the over-bed table lay sketches for cabinets, detailed drawings of molding profiles, and notes on electrical outlet and light fixture placement. Liam perched in the visitor's chair, notebook open, listening intently as Walter explained the mathematics of a perfect archway. "The curve has to be just right," Walter insisted. "Too shallow, it looks weak. Too pronounced, it overwhelms the space." Liam nodded, jotting careful notes. "I'll show the framing crew tomorrow. Make sure they get the proportion." As the boy left, promising to return with progress photos, Clara noticed the change in her husband. Still physically frail, but mentally alive, his expertise finding new life through Liam's eager hands. That night, as Walter slept, Clara opened the toolbox again. Tucked among the drafting tools was a small note in Liam's precise handwriting. Asterisk, "A good builder knows when to let others carry the load. A great builder knows how to guide them while they do." Asterisk, she smiled, recognizing Walter's own wisdom, once shared, now returned to sustain him when he needed it most. December cloaked the hills in heavy snow, muffling the world under a white quilt. Inside the lodge, work continued steadily. Insulation installed, drywall hung and taped, electrical wiring threaded through walls. Though exterior work paused until spring, the enclosed structure offered a warm haven for the finishing touches that would turn the building into a home. Walter, now recovered enough to visit the site regularly under Clara's watchful eye, stood in what would be their living room, overseeing the installation of the stone fireplace. Built with creek stones from the stream bordering their land, the hearth echoed their original lodge, but with subtle enhancements. A more efficient draft, a wider mantel, a stone bench to capture and radiate heat. "Perfect," Walter nodded to Ed Larson, who'd taken over as lead mason. "Clara will love that seating area on cold mornings." "Liam's design," Ed remarked, stepping back to admire their work. "Boy thinks of everything." Walter smiled with something akin to paternal pride. In the weeks since his health scare, Liam had stepped into a leadership role beyond his years, coordinating volunteers, solving problems, and blending Walter's vision with his own innovations. The afternoon brought a special delivery. The lodge's front door, a solid oak piece Daniel Carter had been crafting in his workshop for weeks. As volunteers helped carry it in, Walter noticed Liam hanging back, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his stance. "Something wrong?" Walter asked as the door was temporarily set in its frame. "I made something," Liam said, reaching into his backpack. "For the lodge, for you and Mrs. Brooks." He pulled out a wooden plaque, about 15 inches long and 8 inches high. Carved into its surface was the silhouette of the hill range visible from their front deck, etched with striking precision. Beneath it, in carefully crafted lettering, read Brooks Hill Haven. Walter took the sign, tracing his fingers over the smooth wood and sharp carving. "You made this yourself?" Liam nodded. "Dad helped with some of the lettering, but I did the design and carving." "It's beautiful," Walter said, genuinely moved. "But I'm not sure about the name. Don't you like it?" Liam asked, disappointment flickering. "It's not that," Walter assured him. "It's just, a home's name should reflect its story, don't you think? And this lodge's story includes more than just Clara and me." Understanding lit Liam's face. "You want to change it?" Walter nodded, thoughtful. "What about Brooks Carter Haven? Seems right, considering how much of yourself you've put into these walls." Liam stared, clearly stunned. "You put our name on your home? Why not? Your fingerprints are all over it. Your design, your vision." Walter gestured around them. Besides, a name should tell the truth, and the truth is, this place wouldn't exist without you. Daniel Carter, overhearing as he adjusted the door hinges, paused. That's quite an honor, Walter. An earned one, Walter replied firmly. The moment was interrupted as Clara arrived with a group of women carrying food containers for the workers. She noticed the sign in Walter's hands and came over. What's this? She asked. Our lodge sign, Walter explained, though we're discussing a slight tweak to the name. Clara studied the carved piece. Brooks Hill Haven, she read. It's lovely, Liam. But Walter wants to change it to Brooks Carter Haven, Daniel added, watching his son's reaction. Clara looked between Walter and Liam, grasping the significance instantly. I think that's perfect, she said softly. This home belongs to both our stories now. Liam's usual composure faltered, his eyes bright with emotion. He quickly blinked it away. I can make a new one, he offered. No need to start over, Walter said. Just add to what you've created, like we did with the lodge itself. Later, as the winter sun dipped early behind the hills, casting long shadows across the snow, the volunteers gathered for a small ceremony. The front door was officially hung on its hinges, replacing the temporary construction entrance with the proper entryway. Walter insisted Liam install the modified sign, now reading Brooks Carter Haven beneath the hill silhouette. The addition blended so seamlessly it seemed part of the original design. Every home needs a proper name, Walter announced to the group, something that tells its story and welcomes those who enter. Pastor Thompson stepped forward with a small bottle of olive oil. In the old tradition, he explained, we bless the doorway through which all the life of the home will pass. A hush settled as the pastor anointed the doorframe, his prayer honoring not just the physical structure, but the community that raised it, a modern barn-raising born of necessity and love. As darkness fell and volunteers departed, Walter, Clara, and Liam lingered in the doorway beneath the newly mounted sign. No words were needed as they shared the moment, each reflecting on the journey that brought them here, a destroyed home, an improbable dream, and the bridge between generations that made restoration possible. From ruin had come not just rebuilding, but renewal, a home whose name now told the story of what can happen when determination transcends age. When wisdom flows between young and old, when a community remembers its strength lies in caring for its most vulnerable, miracles take root. As January's biting cold gripped the hills, interior work on the lodge pressed on steadily. Walls were painted in the soft, golden hue Clara had chosen. Hardwood floors were laid, blending salvage boards from the original structure with new maple planks, and kitchen cabinets were mounted to Walter's precise specifications. The Millers had generously extended their hospitality through the winter, but Walter and Clara grew increasingly restless for their own space, their own rhythms, their own independence. Though unspoken, the weight of dependency pressed heavily on them both. The plumbing inspector signed off yesterday, Daniel reported during a progress meeting at the Miller's kitchen table. Electrical final is set for next Tuesday. What about the move-in timeline? Walter asked, trying to mask his impatience. Daniel glanced at Liam before answering. Officially, we're looking at early February. There are some finishing touches. We don't need finishing touches, Walter cut in. Just a working bathroom and kitchen. The rest can wait. Clara rested a gentle hand on his arm. We've waited this long, she said. A few more weeks won't hurt. But later that evening, as Clara prepared for bed in the Miller's guest room, she found Walter sitting on the edge of the mattress, staring at a prescription bottle with deep frustration. 3 pills a day, he muttered. Morning, noon, and night for the rest of my life. Clara sat beside him, the mattress dipping slightly. Small price for keeping you here, she said lightly. Walter's expression didn't soften. I'm not the man I was, Clara. Can't build like I used to. Can't even move our furniture without risking another heart episode. None of us are who we were, she replied matter-of-factly. That's what living does. The following Saturday brought an unexpected snowstorm, canceling the planned workday. By Sunday afternoon, the hill roads were cleared enough for essential travel. Walter persuaded Tom to drive him to the lodge site, saying he needed to check that no pipes had frozen in the cold snap. As they pulled up, Walter was surprised to see Daniel's truck already parked outside. "Looks like someone beat us here," Tom remarked. Inside, they found Liam working alone, installing handrails along the short hallway to the bedroom. "What's this?" Walter asked, running his hand along the smooth wooden rail. Liam looked up, briefly startled. "Just something I thought might be useful," he said, returning to his work with steady focus. Walter watched as the boys secured the mounting brackets with practiced ease. The handrails, crafted from walnut, blended seamlessly with the lodge's aesthetic, functional yet elegant. Looking around, Walter began to notice other subtle additions. A gentle ramp instead of a step at the back entrance, electrical outlets placed higher to minimize bending, lever door handles instead of knobs, a pull-out step stool hidden in the cabinetry's kick. These modifications, Walter said slowly, they weren't in the original plans. Liam focused on aligning the final bracket. "I added them as we went," he admitted. "For you and Mrs. Brooks." "Because we're old," Walter said, half bitterly. Liam looked up, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "For safety," he corrected, "and convenience." Walter felt a tangle of emotions, gratitude woven with pride, laced with the sharp sting of his own limitations. These thoughtful adaptations reflected both Liam's care and a quiet reminder of Walter's waning strength. "Smart design," Walter said at last, echoing Ed Larson's earlier praise of Liam's work. "I didn't want to make it obvious," Liam explained, easing at Walter's acceptance. "My grandfather hated anything that made him feel old. But after your heart scare, I thought," he trailed off, uncertain. Walter nodded, catching the unspoken concern. "You thought we might need help, but wouldn't ask for it." "Yes, sir." Tom, who had been inspecting the kitchen modifications with interest, joined them. "Kid thinks of everything," he said. "These pull-out shelves in the lower cabinets are genius. Ellen would love these in our kitchen." As they toured the lodge, Walter noticed more of Liam's subtle innovations. A shower with both fixed and handheld sprayers, a kitchen island tailored to Clara's 5 feet 3 inches frame, extra lighting in areas requiring precision. None of these stood out as accommodations for age or frailty. They were simply smart design choices that anticipated needs before they arose. Later, as Tom drove them back to the Millers, Walter stayed quiet. "Everything okay?" Tom asked. "Lodge is looking good, I thought." "It is," Walter agreed. "Better than good." "Then what's on your mind?" Walter gazed out at the snow-draped hills. "When you're young," he said at last, "you build for today. When you're older, you realize you should have built for tomorrow." Tom nodded, understanding dawning. "The boy built for your tomorrows." "Yes," Walter said softly. "All the ones he could imagine." The women of the Hill community gathered in Ellen Miller's living room, their hands busy over a quilt spread across their laps. What began as a simple housewarming gift had grown into a rich tapestry of shared memory, each square telling a story, each stitch a bond. "Clara will be back from her doctor's appointment by 4, Ellen reminded them. "We need to finish the binding today if we want this ready for the move-in." Hannah Carter nodded, her needle catching the afternoon light. "Liam says they're doing the final walkthrough tomorrow. If all goes well, the Brooks can move in this weekend." 6 months from ruin to new home. Mia, Fletcher marveled. "I still can't believe it." "Belief had little to do with it," said Eleanor Hayes, the eldest at 85. "Hard work and that boy's determination made it happen." The quilt under their hands defied traditional patterns. At its center, Ellen had recreated the outline of the original lodge using fabrics salvaged from Clara's curtains and upholstery. Surrounding it were squares from different families, some depicting hill landscapes, others woven with fabrics of personal meaning. Pastor Thompson's wife contributed a square made from her husband's old clerical stole, symbolizing the prayer service held after the storm. The Peterson family's square used scraps from flour sacks, nodding to the meals they provided during construction. Hannah Carter's square incorporated patches from Liam's outgrown flannel shirts, arranged in a pattern echoing his blueprints. "Did anyone use this?" asked Maggie Larson, holding up a scrap of faded navy fabric. Ellen examined it. "That's from Walter's old work shirt. Clara saved it from the ruins. She hoped someone could work it in." Maggie considered it. "It'd be perfect for the sky in my hill scene." As they stitched, conversation flowed among women who'd known each other for decades and those newer to the hills. They shared stories of Walter and Clara, his gruff kindness when neighbors needed repairs, her quiet generosity during sickness and births. Remember when they took into Morgan's after that landslide in '93? Eleanor recalled, for extra people in that small lodge for nearly a month, and how Clara organized the school supplies drive every August, Ellen added, ensuring no child started the year without what they needed. The women worked steadily through the afternoon, their collective memory stitching together not just fabric, but the invisible threads of hill life. The quilt became a tangible symbol of what had always bound them: mutual support, shared history, the knowledge that no one survived the hills alone. As the sun began its early winter descent, they added final touches: a hand-embroidered label on the back with a date and occasion, a decorative border of cedar trees and ridges, tiny glass beads catching the light like morning frost. "It's beautiful," Hannah breathed as they spread the finished quilt across Ellen's bed for a final look. The creation told a story beyond words, a patchwork of interconnected lives, hardship transformed through shared effort, a community that knew the true meaning of neighboring. "Do you think they'll understand what it means?" Mia asked, smoothing a wrinkle. Eleanor smiled, her weathered face warm. "They've lived in these hills longer than most of us. They'll understand." When Clara returned from her appointment, the women had tucked the quilt into a cedar box tied with ribbon, keeping their secret project hidden until the move-in day when the community would gather to welcome the Brooks home. That evening, Clara sat with Walter at the Miller's kitchen table, reviewing the final inspection checklist. "It's really happening," she said softly. "After everything, we're going home." "A new home," Walter amended. "But on the same ground," Clara countered. "With the same view, the same sunrise." Walter nodded, grasping her meaning. The structure was new, but the essence of home went beyond walls and roof. It was the hills themselves, the familiar play of light across the valley, the sense of belonging to this place. "I packed most of our things today," Clara continued. "It didn't amount to much in the end." "We travel lighter now," Walter observed. Unspoken between them was the awareness that this lodge would likely be their last, built not just for today, but with foresight for the challenges of aging. Liam's thoughtful adaptations honored that reality while preserving their dignity and independence. As they prepared for bed in what would soon no longer be their temporary shelter, Clara felt a sudden wave of tears. "The Millers have been so good to us," she explained when Walter noticed. "Everyone has. We'll repay it," Walter assured her. "In different ways, perhaps, but we will." Clara nodded, knowing gratitude, like the community quilt, took many forms, sometimes visible, sometimes woven into the quiet fabric of daily life. February dawned with unexpected warmth, as if nature itself blessed the timing. Snow lingered in shaded hollows, but the path to the finished lodge was clear and dry under a vivid blue sky. Vehicles arrived mid-morning, trucks and SUVs navigating the hill roads with ease, parking along the widened driveway Daniel Carter had insisted on building for when you have visitors. Children spilled from back seats, clutching wrapped packages. Adults carried covered dishes and folding chairs. Inside the empty lodge, Liam made final checks, ensuring every window opened smoothly, every door hung level, and the stone fireplace drew properly. Though professionals handled the electrical and plumbing, nearly every other detail bore his touch, from the roof's precise angle to shed heavy snow to the custom bookshelves sized for Walter's specific collection. The inspection had passed, the occupancy permit granted. All that remained was the ceremonial handover, the moment when the construction site officially became a home. In his pocket, Liam carried a special creation he'd worked on for weeks. Using traditional blacksmithing techniques learned from books and online tutorials, he'd forged an iron key, distinct from modern equivalents, substantial, ornate, more symbolic than practical in an era of standard locks. Its handle wove together design element from the original lodge and the new structure, while the shaft and teeth were precisely cut to fit the front door's deadbolt. As noon neared, Pastor Thompson gathered the community on the front deck, where Walter and Clara stood arm in arm, visibly moved by the turnout. "Neighbors," the pastor began, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "Today we celebrate more than a building. We celebrate resilience, community, and the bridge between generations that made this possible." Walter's gaze swept over the familiar faces, grown closer through months of construction. Ed Larson, who'd taken time off to perfect the stone fireplace. The Peterson family, who donated lumber and meals. Ellen and Tom Miller, whose guest room had been a temporary haven. And, standing slightly apart, the Carter family, Daniel and Hannah watching proudly as Liam stood with quiet anticipation. The weight of the moment clear in his serious expression. 6 months ago, Pastor Thompson continued, we witnessed destruction. Today we celebrate creation, not just of walls and roof, but of something less tangible, a testament to what we achieve when we come together. Clara squeezed Walter's hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The past months had been hard, but they brought unexpected gifts, new friendships, deeper bonds, the realization that independence and interdependence could coexist. And now, the pastor said, turning to Liam, I believe someone has a presentation to make. Liam stepped forward, suddenly self-conscious before the crowd, though he'd spent months guiding adults twice and thrice his age. Public speaking remained a challenge for the quiet, thoughtful boy. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, he began, his voice steadying as he focused on the couple. When we started this, you trusted me with your home. Today, I want to return that trust. From his pocket, he drew the handcrafted key, its metal gleaming in the winter sunlight. This key works the front door lock, he explained. I made it by hand, the old way, like the hinges from your original lodge. It's one of a kind, just like this home. Walter took the key, its weight solid in his palm. Unlike the flimsy keys of modern homes, this one had presence, a tangible symbol of security and belonging. The best locks, Liam continued, gaining confidence in the technical details, have pins that align perfectly when the right key fits. It's about precise matching, each part doing its job exactly. Walter nodded, grasping the metaphor. The rebuilding had been much the same, each person contributing their unique skills, each piece serving its purpose to create something stronger than the sum of its parts. Would you like to try it? Liam asked, nodding toward the door. Walter handed the key to Clara. You should do the honors, he said softly. You're the one who makes any place we live a home. With steady hands defying her 80 years, Clara inserted the key into the lock. The smooth click of the mechanism sparked a spontaneous cheer from the crowd. As the door swung open, Walter and Clara stood on the threshold of their new beginning. Beyond lay rooms filled with light, some furnishings salvaged and restored, others donated or newly bought, all arranged to Clara's precise instructions, relayed through Liam's meticulous notes. Welcome home, Liam said simply. Clara impulsively drew Liam into a warm embrace, propriety forgotten in the swell of emotion. Walter's hand found Liam's shoulder, a firm grip conveying what words couldn't fully capture. Together, they crossed the threshold, the elderly couple and the young boy whose vision had built not just a structure of wood and stone, but a legacy of resilience, connection, and the quiet power of seeing possibilities where others saw only wreckage. Spring arrived in the hills with a gentle persistence that echoed the Brooks' adjustment to their new lodge. Snowdrops pushed through melting drifts, streams swelled with runoff, and the lodge settled into its foundation with soft creaks and sighs that became familiar night sounds. Walter's favorite ritual was the evenings, easing into the handcrafted rocking chair on the covered deck. From there, he could watch the hills shift moods, cloud shadows racing across ridges, deer stepping cautiously from forest edges, an occasional hawk gliding on thermals above the valley. Clara often joined him, bringing mugs of tea or coffee, depending on the evening's chill. Sometimes they sat in quiet companionship. Other times they planned small garden expansions or discussed letters from their far-off children, who'd been astonished and touched by news of the community's rebuilding effort. On this evening, Walter recognized the familiar rumble of Daniel Carter's truck navigating the final curve to their driveway. Moments later, Liam appeared, carrying his school backpack and a small toolbox. "Mr. Brooks," he called, climbing the deck steps. "I finished that weather station project. Thought you might want to see it." Since move-in day, 6 weeks prior, Liam had kept up regular visits. First to tweak minor details in the lodge, then evolving into a bond that defied simple labels. Not quite grandfather and grandson, more than mentor and student, they'd found common ground in shared projects and quiet talks. "Let's see it, then," Walter replied, clearing space on the small deck table. Liam carefully unpacked a wooden box from his backpack. Inside, a blend of digital components and traditional mechanical gauges formed an elegant marriage of old and new. It measures temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and wind speed, Liam explained, pointing to each part. "The anemometer needs to go on the roof peak, but the rest can mount here on the deck rail." Walter studied the craftsmanship with genuine admiration. "Your design?" "Mostly," Liam admitted. "Dad helped with weatherproofing the outdoor sensors." Clara emerged from inside, carrying a plate of warm molasses cookies fresh from the oven. "I thought I heard your voice," she said, smiling at Liam. Just in time for the first batch. As they ate the cookies, Walter and Liam discussed the best placement for the weather instruments, their conversation flowing easily. Technical details mixed with practical concerns, occasional disagreements settled through reasoned compromise. Clara watched with quiet contentment. Walter had always been reserved, especially after retirement shrank his world. Now, he spoke more openly, enlivened by the exchange of ideas and the joy of sharing knowledge honed over decades in the hills. "How's school?" Clara asked during a pause in the technical talk. "Good," Liam replied. "My science teacher liked the lodge design project. Said it showed exceptional understanding of environmental adaptation." High praise, Walter nodded. "Well-deserved. I've been thinking about architecture," Liam continued, a touch of shyness in his voice. "Maybe studying it after high school." "You'd be excellent," Clara encouraged. "You've got the mathematical mind for it, the artistic eye. And the practical experience," Walter added. "Most architects never build what they design. Knowing how things work in the real world gives you an edge." Liam ducked his head at the praise, but his pleasure shone through. "I was hoping you might write a letter someday for college applications." "We'd be honored," Clara assured him, squeezing his hand. As evening softened into dusk, Liam and Walter mounted the weather station components, the barometer and temperature gauge on the deck rail, the wind vane and anemometer higher up to catch clear air currents. Clara brought more mugs of coffee and settled in her own chair, not a rocker like Walter's, but a deep-seated Adirondack angled perfectly for her shorter frame. Together, the three watched the instruments come alive, needles settling, digital displays tracking the hill's vital signs. 72 degrees, Liam noted. Barometric pressure rising slightly. "Fair weather tomorrow," Walter confirmed, feeling the rightness of the moment. The seamless blend of experience and innovation, wisdom and fresh perspective. As darkness gathered, fireflies winked along the forest edge, their glow mirroring the emerging stars. Liam stayed longer than usual, drawn into Walter's stories of how hill weather patterns had shifted over decades, now given context by their new instruments. When Daniel arrived to pick up his son, he declined Clara's invitation to come inside, sensing the contentment of the scene. Liam perched on the deck rail, animatedly discussing cloud formations with Walter, while Clara knitted quietly, adding her own observations now and then. "Looks like you've got a junior meteorologist on your hands," Daniel said. "He's got the mind for it," Walter agreed. "Sees patterns, makes connections. He talks about you folks all the time," Daniel said, voice lowering. "What you're teaching him, the stories you share, it means a lot." Walter nodded, understanding the unspoken gratitude. "The learning goes both ways," he said simply. After they left, Walter and Clara lingered on the deck, watching headlights vanish around the hill's curve. The weather instruments ticked softly, measuring the invisible forces shaping their world. "He's a remarkable boy," Clara observed. "He'll go far," Walter agreed. "Further than these hills." The thought brought pride and a pang of melancholy. Nurturing a young mind meant eventually watching it venture beyond their shared space. But that was tomorrow's concern. For now, the rocking chair on the deck, the home rebuilt through collective will, and the bridge between generations were enough. A year had passed since the storm that razed the Brooks' original lodge. Summer draped the hills in vibrant green, wildflowers dotting the meadow around the new structure, birds nesting in eaves designed to shelter them. Clara knelt in her garden's rich soil, transplanting herb seedlings with practiced care. The raised beds, another of Liam's thoughtful additions, let her tender passion without the back pain that had increasingly limited her in recent years. "Liam's here," Walter called from the deck, where his rocking chair had worn smooth patches in the cedar planks. Clara looked up to see the boy, taller now at 13, his frame hinting at the man he'd become, walking up the path. In his arms, he carried a small tree sapling, its root ball wrapped in burlap. "What's that you've got?" Clara asked, peeling off her gardening gloves. "Red maple," Liam replied. "From a forestry project at school. Each student got one to plant." Walter descended the deck steps with care. "Good choice. Slow growing, but they last generations." "That's why I thought it should be here," Liam said, "where it can grow undisturbed." Together, they chose the perfect spot, far enough from the lodge for full growth, positioned to avoid roof damage from future branches, yet visible from the deck where so many evening talks had unfolded. Walter fetched shovels from the tool shed he and Liam had built last fall. They worked as a team, Liam digging the main hole, Walter widening it to his specifications, Clara mixing soil amendments she insisted would give the sapling its best start. "In 20 years, it'll give good shade," Walter noted as they set the young tree. "In 50, it'll be magnificent," Clara added, patting soil around the roots. Liam stepped back, eyeing their work with satisfaction. "In 100, it'll be a landmark." The timeline stretched beyond their lives, yet the act of planting tied them to that distant future, an investment in tomorrow made by today's hands. After securing the sapling with stakes and twine against hill winds, they sat on the deck steps, sharing lemonade Clara had made that morning. Their talk meandered easily. Liam's school achievements, Walter's progress on carving a set of wooden chess pieces, Clara's plans for preserving summer vegetables. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Daniel's truck appeared on the road below. Walter and Clara walked Liam to the driveway, pausing by the new maple. "It needs water every other day for the first month," Clara reminded him. "More if we don't get rain." "I'll check on it whenever I visit," Liam promised. "Which better be often," Walter added gruffly, his hand resting briefly on the boy's shoulder. As the truck rolled down the hill road, Walter and Clara lingered by the sapling, its slender form casting a faint shadow in the golden light. "Amazing what can grow from disaster," Clara said quietly. Walter nodded, taking in their rebuilt lodge, the thriving garden, and the young tree that would reach skyward long after they were gone. Like the sapling, Liam would keep growing, his roots strengthened by the bonds forged in that pivotal year. And like the lodge, the Brooks had been rebuilt. Not just their home, but their sense of place in the community, their understanding of independence, their appreciation for the cycle of giving and receiving. The storm had taken much, but what grew in its wake proved far more enduring than what was lost.